Hi, Archana. It's so nice to see you. So, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, to talk to us. What I wanted to talk to you about today was your unique relationship with your sister. Now, all sisters are love each other, but your relationship with your sister was very, very unique, and it would be wonderful if you could talk about that.
Sure. So my younger sister, so I'm the oldest and in my family, and my younger sister was 3 years younger to me. And when she was born, I told my parents to name her Rupali because I had just started going to preschool and my best friend's name was Rupali and she was the kindest and gentlest person to me. And so I named my sister. Little did I know that the fact that I gave my sister her name would have would was the beginning of a very special relationship with her. So she was a second daughter born in the family, and in the small North Indian town that I lived in, my parents received a lot of condolences that they had again had a girl child and it was so difficult to raise girls and then collect dowry for them. And so my mother was offered lots of sympathies, and that was very heartbreaking for me to see. And as a little child, I did not know much, but as we kept growing up, I kept hearing from people that, oh, my mother was so unlucky that she had a second daughter in the same year that all her sisters-in-law had a boy. And my sister's biggest heartbreak was that as a little child, she got to hear all of this and got to hear that she was an unwanted or undesirable gender child. She also
No one was trying to hide that
No one was
from her.
trying to hide that. And that is what I now, at the age of 50, when I look back, I am appalled at how ingrained the patriarchal system was that people felt completely comfortable in saying those things and they felt really normal. In fact, one of my neighbors had three daughters. And then when they had their third daughter, their father had distributed bananas, as like some people would distribute sweets and stuff. And the neighbors made fun of him, saying that, yeah, of course, because he had a third daughter, he was distributing bananas instead of sweets. And that has stuck with me. And my sister also had to follow a really tough time in school. My father was a very highly accomplished doctor. He had been a stellar student all his life, had received many presidential medals. And I happened to be also an overachieving child in academics at school. Um, and then came my sister. And so she was a normal, good, average student, but she was not. In India at that time, we used to have class ranks in a class. So my mother really favored and wanted her children to have the top ranks in the class. I think a lot of Indian parents want that. And I was one of those people who got first or second rank always in every test and every exam, but my sister wasn't. And she got into a lot of trouble at home because of her lack of academic performance. Also, people used to offer pity that if she, since she was a girl and a second girl child, and if she didn't study well, then they'll have trouble marrying her off. And I was the one who was always fighting whenever I heard anything from any aunt or neighbor. If I was around my sister, I would push back. And so I kind of became a shield for her. And I would never allow her to be alone in front of lots of aunties, so that she would never have to hear. And so, right from the beginning of her childhood, I took her under my wing. And as life progressed, she and I went through some hardships when I came as a graduate student in Canada. I suffered from a lot of hardships, and that time she was the one person I wrote to and I called, and who always supported me and always told me that I was her hero. And she knew that I would overcome anything. And hearing that from somebody being raised as a girl in India and always being told to be submissive and make sure you know how to cook, even if you're becoming an engineer. Only
Right.
Indira Gandhi, who was the woman prime minister India had, my relatives would say things like, "Oh, well, only Indira Gandhi gets to have not to get away with without knowing how to cook. If you are a girl, it doesn't matter whether you're a doctor or an engineer, you still have to learn how to cook, and you need to know how to run the kitchen." And I did not want to learn to cook. I was a bookworm. I would hide it and read books. And my sister saved me because she wanted to learn how to cook, and she was an avid cook. And she would go and learn from my mother and make my mother forget that I was not in the kitchen. And so we had this special bond. I saved her in some parts of life, and she saved me from a lot of yellings and anger from a lot of people, that I was only a bookworm and I was not interested in taking care of the house, and I was not learning anything to be like the efficient homemaker that my mother was. My mother was a
Right.
very hardworking woman, and our house ran beautifully, and I was least interested. I just
That's,
studied and excelled in my studies, but I did not do anything around the house. But my sister was the foil, and so
and
we
then,
would
and
work.
then the relationship changed even further,
Yes.
and became even stronger when she
Yeah.
was diagnosed with diabetes.
Yes. So that was a very life forming junction, both my sister and my life. My sister was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, which is called also type A diabetes, at the age of 14, which is pretty much the last age that one can be diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. Children as young as 2 years of old age can be diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. And when she was diagnosed with that, it almost felt like all hell broke loose, because now she was not only a second girl child, but she was a sick second girl child. And people started saying things like, well, she will never be able to marry. Nobody would want a defective girl to be married into their house. And so she would be a burden on my parents in their old age. And who's going to take care of her when they die? And that was an extremely heartbreaking time. She had to go through putting insulin injections on herself twice a day, either in her stomach or in her thighs. And that was a heart wrenching, vision to see. In fact, she would hide herself in a room and she gave herself injections because it was extremely tough to watch her give that. Um, she started struggling with academics, obviously. And at that time, now I realize that there was no concept of mental health for a child who's suffering so much autoimmune disease, hearing all these things and pressure of the society. And she was handling all of this herself, and she always smiled and had a self-deprecating humor, and that took a lot of toll on her. And she would hear really heartbreaking things like how much money was being spent on her medicine. It must have been so hard on my parents to support her. And so I once again became this person who was like her shield. And anytime anybody said anything to her, I would pick up a fight. And I started getting into some trouble with relatives and neighbors as this outspoken girl who speaks too loudly, because I couldn't bear to have my sister be told that she was a burden. And so that made me extremely protective. Almost now, I did not know at that time, but now that I have raised my own two kids, I realize that probably that was my first mothering instinct. I almost started mothering my sister because I just wanted to protect her and tell the world that they had no idea how precious and how bright and how gentle she was. She was the kindest soul I've ever met in my life. My maternal grandmother was also a very kind person, but I don't think I've ever met anybody as kind and gentle as my younger sister, who kept helping people even though she herself was suffering all alone in her misery.
Okay, so, and then there was an event where you wanted to, where you had the opportunity to help her even more, almost give her life.
Yes. So in 2007 was an extremely difficult year for my sister. In February of 2007, she had a heart attack. Luckily, she was in my father's house, who's a doctor, and my father caught it. And that's when we realized that her diabetes had really started playing havoc on her body. Um, but in about April of 2007 is when she went for a checkup for her heart condition, and they found out that her kidneys had failed. And now that meant that she needed to go get onto dialysis right away. And also, she needed a kidney donor if she were to survive.
Right.
And so when I heard this, I instinctively decided that I'm going to donate my kidney. And uh, it is so easy to think that you want to do something, but actually, something as complex as organ donation is not just a matter of somebody wanting to do something. It's not like money that if we have some in the bank, we can give it to somebody else. In order to become an organ donor, you actually have to qualify. First of all, your blood type has to be the kind that the receiver's body can handle. Number two, you cannot have any medical issues of your own in order to become an organ donor. And then, at that time, I had a young family as well. I had a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old, and there were practical worries about the success of such a organ donation surgery. And my immediate family, very understandably, was deeply stressed out about this decision of mine to become an organ donor. It is just so it also happened that in 2007, August of 2007, I believe, but sometime in 2007, Indian government passed a rule that said that organ donation can only be done by people who are from the same blood family, blood relatives, because the organ transplant had become an exploratory business in India, where some poor people were coaxed or forced to give their organs in order to get money or to pay off their loans and stuff. It had become pretty predatory. And so it just so happened in 2007, Indian government passed that rule. And while a lot of people suggested to my parents that they could go undercover and pay somebody under the table, my family was a very rule following family, and my parents did not want to do anything illegal. And so they were very concerned, how were they going to find a donor? And they started looking into whether they should fly my sister to Singapore or Pakistan or Bangladesh. But I said that I really wanted to donate my kidney. So I flew to India in July of 2007, and I stayed there for a month. And in Apollo in Chennai, they did a battery of tests on me. And it was a grueling experience, and also a very eye-opening and heart-opening experience for me, because I had to go and sit in Apollo Hospital multiple times a week and give a lot of blood tests and heart condition tests and all a battery of tests to prove that I was a healthy donor. And I sat in the middle of a lot of people who were either donors or patients, and I saw that suffering in real time. And while I was going through these battery of tests, my sister's dialysis had to continue because she had to undergo dialysis twice a week. And at that time in India, there was a traditional way of doing dialysis, and that the catheter that was put for my sister to get it, kept getting infected. So my sister's was kept, they had to keep redoing it. And it was an agonizingly painful experience for her. And I watched her go through it. And I realized that suffering is such an isolating experience that we can, our most beloved people, our children, our spouses, our family, we can love them as much as we want, we can do whatever, but we cannot take their suffering away. They
Right.
suffer themselves. And that was a very heartbreaking realization for me, that I can give an organ to my sister, hopefully I can save her, but I cannot take away her suffering. She went
Right.
through so much physical suffering. But I was lucky, and
You ended up giving the kidney.
I did end up giving my kidney. I qualified as a donor, and so both of us had our kidney, transplant surgery on August 18th, 2007. And my parents, my husband and my sister's husband and our three children were there. And it was a very tough moment for them, especially I think for my parents, to see both of their daughters wheeled into the operation theater. And at that time in India, organ transplant surgeries did lead to sometimes post-operative infections, and sometimes they were even fatal. And so obviously it was a very stressful time for my family. And my parents were really worried that they might lose both their daughters. And my parents were very worried that if something were to happen to me, what would happen to my young girls at that time. So it was an extremely stressful time in my family. It was very difficult for almost 4 days before the surgery. The atmosphere in the house was so tense. I could even feel it and palpably in my 3-year-old niece, my sister's daughter. We were all on high alert and very, very difficult. But I was extremely lucky, and my our surgery went flawlessly. And I actually came home after a week. It took me for 3 weeks to recover. My sister had to stay in the hospital for almost a month. Her recovery was slower. And then we came back home. We were one of the lucky ones where we had the financial means to not have to worry about money part of it. We also had the good fortune that my mom was around and physically able to take care of both of us. Our little daughters were amazing to us, and they took really good care of us. And after that, my sister, every August 18th, she would send me a card, or she'd send me a note. And she officially started calling me herself my third daughter. And she started saying happy birthday to me from Archana Mommy. And that became quite a joke, and it was really heartwarming. And I just felt on top of the world that I had something that I could give to my sister that allowed her to come back to health and enjoy her family life.
And
And,
it saved her life.
yeah, it saved her life. And I just felt that the miracle of medical science. And it's been now 14, no, actually it's been, yeah, it's been about 14 years. Yeah, it's been about 14 years since that surgery. And the surgery, organ transplant surgery, has become only better, only easier. I had a family friend who reached out to me 3 years ago, wondering if it's okay and safe to give his kidney to his relative. And he talked to me in detail, and then he was convinced that, yeah, it was not a scary thing. And actually we found out that his surgery, the advancement in medical science has happened so much that he actually came home within 2 days, and he was able to go back to work within 2 weeks. And so such a major surgery, yes, but the medical science is amazing. And they have made it so easy for an organ donor to give their organ. And the hardest part of transplant surgery is for a receiver's body to accept it and not reject it. There's a term
Right.
called rejection,
Rejection. Yeah.
because antibodies in the receptor's body can attack the new organ.
Right.
And the medical science has really worked hard on it. And more and more recipients of organs are able to keep their organ and then go on to live a full life. And the thing was that we hadn't realized it was like a kind of a boiling frog syndrome, where when the water boils, the frog doesn't know that the water is boiling. With my sister, when her health was declining, we hadn't seen how far she had declined. But when she got this new kidney, she sprung back to life so much. That's when we realized how much the lack of kidneys and her disease had
Right.
compromised the quality of her life.
Right.
And
Right.
that was another revelation, and that was another huge gift for her, that
Right.
sprung back to an almost normal life.
That is great.
And
Right.
yeah, it
So,
was, I was lucky that I qualified to be a donor.
well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Archana. This is absolutely amazing. And I think what you did for your sister is unique in every way, supporting her from the beginning till the very end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.